People are afraid to oppose it because they accept this myth. If you give the government the power, it will keep us safe. It doesn't keep us safe, and it doesn't keep us free when we give the government our liberties.
How would you react to this statement? We're 2 or 3 major terrorist strikes away from a police state.
I fear that the statement is true. I fear that the American public, like generations before us, will accept the nonsense, and it is nonsense, that if we give up our liberties, the government will keep us safe. Meaning a police state could only happen here with public approval, and there would be public approval. President Bush argued, President Obama argued, articulately, their first job is to keep us safe. They are wrong. Their first job is to keep us free.
Quote Benjamin Franklin.
Those who would give up essential liberty in order to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. If the president keeps us safe but unfree, he is not doing his job and he is violating his oath.
Yeah, people in some prisons are safe.
Correct.
But they're not free. You're pretty hard on George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. For those in the audience who have not been exposed to Mr. Napolitano, let me say this. I have rarely met anybody who censors himself less. I'm going to challenge you.
Is that a good thing that I don't censor myself, or a bad thing?
I'm going to be challenging you with a checklist in a minute to see how far you'll go. But you talked about George Washington as a slave owner, and a very active slave owner.
Yes.
And
the Pennsylvania story.
Yeah, the Pennsylvania story. I mean, you said, quote, Washington punished his slaves by whipping or selling them, divided their families so they can work more efficiently, and provided them with as little means as tolerable. He also raffled off the slaves of those bankrupt slave holders who owed him money. Washington's most gruesome act as a slave owner came in 1784, 5 years before he became president. What was it?
He had the teeth of some of his slaves removed and implanted in his own mouth. He had the toes of some of his slaves cut off. There was no anesthesia at the time, so that they couldn't escape, so that they couldn't run away. And then when the capital of the country was in Philadelphia, and the state of Pennsylvania had said all slaves in the state shall be forthwith set free after 6 months, he and Martha rotated the slaves through from Mount Vernon in Virginia up to Pennsylvania so that they were rotated out before the end of 6 months, so he never had to set them free. This is the President of the United States and his wife engaged in a conspiracy and actively frustrating and violating the Pennsylvania law. Of course, they weren't prosecuted because half the country accepted slavery at the time.
It was legal. Slavery was legal.
Not in Pennsylvania.
And not under natural law, as you point out. You're also very critical of Lincoln, his hypocrisy. You know, the usual historians say, look, these were other times. You have to forgive them this. They at least helped create a constitution with a Bill of Rights. You're more merciless on Lincoln, who you called the tyrant. Could you describe his back and forth with the border states and his position on slavery and what the real cause, you believe, of the Civil War was?
Question. Did the Emancipation Proclamation free the slaves? Answer. It established and permitted slavery in the border states. You really have to read the document before you can understand that. Question. Was Abraham Lincoln interested in freeing the slaves? No. Abraham Lincoln said, I don't care if we have slaves or not. I just have to keep these southern states in the government because my job is to keep the country together because we don't have an income tax. And if we don't collect duties from the ports, and most of them are in the southern states, we can't have a federal government if that money is not coming in. Look, Lincoln arrested 3,000 journalists and publishers and editors in the North. These are not guys with guns shooting at federal soldiers. These are people arrested because of their words, because of what they said about the war. And he had them tried before military tribunals, every one of which was invalidated after Lincoln's death by a Supreme Court that he had just appointed that said the Constitution exists in good times and in bad. When the legislature of Maryland was about to enact legislation he didn't like, he sent troops to arrest every single legislator. He argued against the right to secession, but he caused West Virginia to secede from Virginia so we could have 2 more senators in the Senate and more representatives in the House of Representatives. He was the most tyrannical, most disingenuous, least faithful to the Constitution president we've had in American history. His troops burnt courthouses, raped women, robbed banks killed civilians on a large scale for the first time in the history of the world, all in the name of a defensive war.
And you say it was the prime cause, was not slavery.
In my view, the prime cause was Lincoln's fear that the government would collapse if it didn't have economic activity from the South, particularly duties and excise taxes collected at every port from Wilmington to Houston. There were only 3 other ports in the country: Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. All the others were in the South. They lost 75%, or were due to lose 75% of the income from those ports.
And you mentioned states' rights in your book, too.
States' rights is a difficult argument to make because
on the Civil War.
On the Civil War, of course, because 8 of the states believed that they had the power to suspend the free will of individuals on the basis of their color. An abominable, condemnable, horrific state of affairs about which I wrote in Dred Scott's Revenge, but not something Lincoln was interested in eradicating. If he was, why would he have said to the border states and to New Orleans, "You can keep slavery," which is what he said in the so-called Emancipation Proclamation.
Well, of course, a lot of Lincoln's apologist is, he was in the Civil War. His top priority was preserving the Union, and he would do anything to preserve the Union.
Even kill innocents. I mean, if the Constitution prohibits anything, it prohibits executing people without due process.
You think we would have lost the Union if he performed with due process and more humane?
I think slavery would have died a natural death, as it did in Great Britain and Portugal and Brazil and France and Puerto Rico, and we would have stayed as a confederation of some sort.
Okay, now I'm going to give you, it's not a Letterman top 10.